January 26th, 1945. The snow-covered forests of northeastern France were eerily quiet. For weeks, American forces had been pushing the German army back toward the Rhine River after their failed Ardennes offensive, better known as the Battle of the Bulge. The Nazis were retreating on nearly every front, but they weren't finished. Hidden behind the frozen villages and dense forests of the Colmar Pocket, German commanders prepared one final counterattack. Hundreds of experienced soldiers, armored Panther tanks, heavy artillery, all moving toward a small American company that had already been shattered by days of relentless fighting. The odds were impossible. Outnumbered, outgunned, and dangerously exposed. Within the next hour, one young lieutenant would make a decision so unbelievable that military historians still struggle to describe it. Not because he defeated an army, but because he refused to abandon his men. This is the true story of Audie Murphy, the most decorated American soldier of the Second World War, a hero from nowhere. Long before newspapers called him a hero, before generals saluted him, before Hollywood turned him into a movie star, Audie Murphy was simply a poor farm boy from rural Texas. He was born in 1925 into a family that knew hardship better than comfort. His parents struggled to provide enough food for their children. School often came second to work. As a child, Audie hunted squirrels and rabbits, not for sport, but because his family needed something to eat. Life taught him responsibility long before adulthood. When his father abandoned the family, the burden became even heavier. By the time Audie was a teenager, survival had already become part of everyday life. Nobody imagined this quiet young boy would one day become America's greatest combat hero. 2-0 small 2-0 BEA soldier. When the United States entered World War II after Pearl Harbor, thousands of young Americans rushed to enlist. Audie wanted to join immediately. He believed serving his country was both a duty and an opportunity to escape poverty. But there was a problem. He looked far younger than his age. Standing only about 5 feet, 4 inches tall, and weighing barely over 100 pounds, recruiters questioned whether he could survive military training, let alone combat. Several branches turned him away. To many officers, he simply didn't look like soldier material. But Audie refused to give up. Eventually, after finally meeting the enlistment requirements, he joined the United States Army in 1942. He was only 17 years old. Many of the older recruits joked that he looked more like a schoolboy than a soldier. Some even nicknamed him Baby. No one laughed for long. Learning T.O. Fig Hat. Basic training transformed the young Texan. Although he lacked size and physical strength compared to many recruits, he possessed something far more valuable: determination. Audie studied everything: marksmanship, patrolling, small unit tactics, weapons handling. He spent extra hours improving his shooting skills until instructors recognized him as one of the best marksmen in his unit. He wasn't the strongest, he wasn't the loudest, but he learned faster than almost everyone else. His officers noticed something unusual. Under pressure, Audie remained calm. That quality would soon save countless lives. Baptism OF fire. In early 1943, Audie crossed the Atlantic with American forces heading toward North Africa. Soon afterward, he found himself fighting alongside the veteran 15th Infantry Regiment. Combat was nothing like training. The explosions, the fear, the confusion. No classroom could prepare a soldier for his first battlefield. Yet Audie adapted almost immediately. While many soldiers froze during their first firefight, he reacted with remarkable confidence. He moved quickly, observed carefully, and never hesitated when action became necessary. His fellow soldiers began trusting him with dangerous assignments, not because he outranked them, but because he always seemed to know exactly what needed to be done. A soldier WHO never backed down. The war carried Audie Murphy across Sicily, Italy, southern France, and eventually into the heart of Europe. Each campaign tested him even further. He repeatedly volunteered for dangerous patrols. He rescued fellow soldiers under enemy fire. He destroyed machine gun positions that had pinned down entire platoons. More than once, he attacked enemy positions almost alone. Promotion followed promotion. Private, corporal, sergeant, officer. Every new rank came at a terrible cost. Friends disappeared. Entire squads were wiped out. Every victory demanded another sacrifice. Audie himself was wounded more than once. Doctors ordered him to rest. Instead, he returned to the front. Again and again. To him, leaving his men behind was simply unthinkable. He legend beggins. By the beginning of 1945, Audie Murphy was only 19 years old. Yet he had already earned a reputation throughout his division. New soldiers looked at his medals with disbelief. Veterans respected him because they knew those decorations had been earned the hard way. But Audie never saw himself as a hero. Whenever reporters praised his courage, he usually changed the subject. He believed the real heroes were the men who never came home. He carried that thought with him every single day. Soon, he and the exhausted soldiers under his command would enter the frozen forests near a small French village called Holzwehr. None of them realized that history was waiting there. And within hours, one American soldier would face an entire German assault force almost completely alone. Winter had turned northeastern France into a frozen battlefield. Snow covered the fields. The trees stood bare against a gray sky. Every breath became visible in the icy air. For the soldiers of the U.S. 7th Army, the war had entered one of its most brutal phases. Although the Battle of the Bulge had ended, Germany was far from defeated. Hitler had ordered every remaining unit to fight with everything they had left. One region remained especially dangerous. It was known as the Colmar Pocket. Stretching across eastern France near the Rhine River, it had become the last major German stronghold west of the German border. As long as the Germans controlled this area, they could continue launching attacks against the advancing Allied armies. American and French forces were determined to eliminate the pocket once and for all. But the Germans had no intention of surrendering. Instead, they prepared one final counteroffensive. Second Lieutenant Audie Murphy now commanded Company B of the 15th Infantry Regiment. On paper, an American rifle company should have numbered well over 100 soldiers. Reality looked very different. After weeks of continuous fighting, many had been killed. Many more had been wounded. Some had simply disappeared during earlier battles. When Murphy counted the men still capable of fighting, only around 40 remained. 40 exhausted soldiers. 40 freezing soldiers. 40 men expected to stop an entire German attack. The burden of leadership rested entirely on Murphy's shoulders. Every decision he made could determine whether those men lived or died. Near the small French village of Holzwehr, Company B occupied the edge of a forest. From there, they could see wide, snow-covered fields stretching toward the village. At first glance, the position seemed reasonable. The trees offered some concealment. But Murphy immediately noticed several serious problems. The frozen ground was almost impossible to dig into. Foxholes provided little protection. The open fields ahead offered almost no natural cover. Even worse, American reinforcements were still miles behind. If the Germans attacked before help arrived, Company B would be completely on its own. Murphy understood the danger better than anyone. Instead of waiting, he quietly prepared for the worst. Murphy ordered his men to strengthen a second defensive position deeper inside the forest. Some soldiers questioned the decision. The enemy hadn't attacked yet. Why prepare another line? Murphy had learned something during nearly 2 years of non-stop combat. Hope for the best. Prepare for the worst. If the first position collapsed, the company would still have somewhere to regroup. It was a simple order, but within hours, it would save countless lives. The morning of January 26, 1945 passed with an uneasy calm. Only occasional artillery fire disturbed the silence. Some soldiers drank cold coffee. Others checked their rifles for the 10th time. Nobody spoke very much. Veterans knew this feeling. Sometimes, the quiet before battle felt more terrifying than the battle itself. Murphy walked along the line, speaking briefly with each squad. He wasn't giving long speeches. He simply wanted every soldier to know that their commander was right there beside them. Leadership wasn't just about giving orders. Sometimes, it was about being seen. Shortly after 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the silence ended. A deep mechanical rumble echoed across the frozen fields. Every American soldier recognized the sound immediately. Tank engines. Murphy raised his binoculars. At first, only movement inside the village. Then, dark shapes emerged through the drifting snow. German armored vehicles, one after another. Massive Panther tanks rolled out from behind the buildings. Their long guns pointed directly toward the American line. But that wasn't the worst part. Behind the armor, figures dressed in white camouflage began spreading across the fields. German infantry. Not dozens, hundreds. Wave after wave advanced through the snow. Murphy estimated nearly 250 enemy soldiers. His company contained barely 40 men. The odds were overwhelming. Murphy reacted instantly. He knew exactly what would happen if his company tried to fight in the open. They would be destroyed. He ordered most of his men to fall back toward the stronger defensive position inside the woods. Some hesitated. Leaving a position while the enemy advanced felt almost like retreat. But Murphy wasn't surrendering. He was buying time. Every minute mattered. Every second increased the chance that his men might survive. While Company B withdrew, Murphy stayed behind, alone, armed with little more than his rifle, a field telephone, a map, and absolute determination. As German tanks rolled closer, Murphy grabbed the field telephone. He contacted American artillery units positioned miles behind the front. Calmly, he began directing artillery fire toward the advancing Germans. Within moments, the sky exploded. American shells crashed into the snowy fields. Columns of smoke and earth shot into the air. German formations scattered briefly before regrouping. Still, they continued advancing. The tanks never slowed. The infantry kept coming. Murphy adjusted the coordinates again. Closer. Even closer. The shells landed almost on top of the enemy. Yet somehow, the Germans continued forward. They knew victory was only a few hundred yards away. Murphy looked across the battlefield once more. His company had nearly completed its withdrawal. The artillery was buying precious time, but he knew it wouldn't be enough. The German tanks were now approaching the American armored support. Within minutes, everything would change, and the battle that followed would become one of the greatest individual acts of courage in military history. The German assault had finally reached full strength. Across the frozen fields outside Holzwehr, 6 German Panther tanks rolled forward in formation. Behind them marched nearly 250 infantrymen, using the armor as moving cover. Machine guns opened fire. Mortar rounds exploded across the tree line. Within seconds, the quiet forest had become a battlefield. The first shells tore through the American position. Branches crashed from the trees. Snow and dirt filled the air. Company B had already begun falling back toward the secondary defensive line exactly as Murphy had ordered. His decision was now proving correct. Had they remained in the original position, many of them would have been trapped and surrounded. But the battle was far from over. The Americans still had one important advantage. 2 M10 tank destroyers waited behind the infantry. Their powerful guns represented the only real chance of stopping the advancing German armor. As the Panthers entered firing range, the American crews opened fire. The first shell screamed across the field. It struck the front armor of a Panther, then bounced away harmlessly. Another shot. The same result. The German tanks kept advancing. Their thick frontal armor was proving almost impossible to penetrate. Murphy watched the exchange through his binoculars. He knew time was running out. Then, disaster struck. One German shell slammed directly into the nearest American tank destroyer. A violent explosion ripped through the vehicle. Flames burst from the engine compartment. Smoke poured into the sky. The surviving crew escaped as quickly as they could. Within moments, half of the American armored support was gone. The second M10 continued fighting. Its crew desperately fired round after round while attempting to reverse into the safety of the woods. Then, the driver lost control. The heavy vehicle slid sideways into a frozen drainage ditch. Its tracks spun uselessly in the ice. The gun could no longer turn toward the enemy. The crew had no choice. They abandoned the vehicle and ran for cover. Now, Company B stood alone. No tanks, no armored support. Only exhausted infantry facing one of the strongest German assaults of the winter campaign. Murphy immediately understood the situation. If he ordered his remaining men to stay, they would all die. Without hesitation, he shouted for every surviving soldier to continue falling back deeper into the forest. Some protested. Others looked toward him in disbelief. "What about you, Lieutenant?" Murphy never answered. He simply picked up the field telephone once again. Someone had to stay behind. Someone had to keep directing artillery fire, and that someone would be him. As his men disappeared into the trees, Murphy remained completely exposed at the edge of the battlefield. German machine guns quickly discovered his position. Bullets ripped through nearby branches. Tree bark exploded around him. Artillery shells shook the frozen ground beneath his feet. Still, he calmly adjusted artillery coordinates. American shells continued crashing into the advancing Germans. Each correction slowed the enemy only slightly. But every minute gained gave Company B more time to prepare its final defense. Soon, the German tanks came even closer. Some passed within only a few dozen yards of Murphy's position. Yet incredibly, he refused to leave. His field telephone remained pressed against his ear. His eyes stayed fixed on the battlefield. The artillery crews several miles away depended entirely on his instructions. Without him, the bombardment would stop. The German infantry sensed victory. Protected by their tanks, they advanced confidently across the snow. The distance between Murphy and the enemy shrank with every passing second. His rifle ammunition was nearly exhausted. The field telephone line had somehow survived the shelling. Everything depended on how long he could remain alive. Then, Murphy looked behind him. Only a few steps away stood the burning American tank destroyer. Flames poured from its engine. Black smoke drifted high into the winter sky. Most soldiers would have stayed as far away from it as possible. The vehicle carried ammunition, fuel. One direct hit could turn it into a massive explosion. But Murphy saw something else. Mounted on top, a fully operational .50 caliber machine gun, a weapon powerful enough to stop advancing infantry, powerful enough to change the battle. Without wasting another second, Audie Murphy sprinted toward the burning vehicle. The German soldiers saw him move. Machine guns immediately shifted their fire. Bullets struck the wreckage all around him. Smoke surrounded the tank destroyer. Flames grew higher. Every instinct told him to stay down. Instead, he climbed onto the burning vehicle, completely exposed, alone, facing hundreds of advancing enemy soldiers. In the next few moments, the 19-year-old lieutenant would perform an act of courage so extraordinary that it would later become one of the most celebrated moments in American military history. The burning tank destroyer was seconds away from becoming a death trap. Flames climbed higher with every passing moment. Smoke poured into the freezing winter air, making it almost impossible to see. Yet instead of running away, Audie Murphy climbed onto it. His boots landed on the burning steel. Heat rose through the metal beneath his feet. Somewhere below him, fuel and ammunition could explode at any second. But Murphy ignored the danger. His eyes were fixed on something far more important. The heavy .50 caliber Browning machine gun mounted on top of the vehicle. Without hesitation, he grabbed the weapon, pulled back the charging handle, and opened fire. The powerful machine gun roared across the frozen battlefield. Its heavy rounds tore through the advancing German infantry. Men who had been confidently moving forward only seconds earlier suddenly threw themselves into the snow. The attack lost its momentum. For the first time that afternoon, the Germans stopped. A target everyone cooled sea. Murphy was now the most visible soldier on the battlefield. Standing on top of a burning vehicle, silhouetted against flames and black smoke, every German soldier could see him. Machine guns immediately concentrated their fire. Bullets ripped through the smoke. Tracer rounds passed only inches away. Tank shells smashed into nearby trees. Wood splinters exploded through the air like deadly knives. Still, Murphy refused to move. He fired short, controlled bursts. Every burst forced the Germans back into cover. Every second delayed the enemy's advance, directing artillery undie fire. Between bursts from the machine gun, Murphy reached for the field telephone. The line was somehow still working. American artillery batteries several miles behind the front were waiting for new coordinates. Murphy calmly reported enemy positions. Within moments, dozens of artillery shells screamed overhead. The frozen fields erupted into explosions. Snow, mud, smoke, and steel filled the air. German infantry scattered once again. But they didn't retreat. Instead, they regrouped and continued moving forward. Murphy adjusted the artillery fire again. Closer, even closer. Every correction landed nearer to his own position. He understood exactly what he was doing. If the artillery stopped, the Germans would overrun Company B. There was no room for hesitation. A desperate gamble. The Germans changed tactics. Instead of attacking in one large wave, small assault groups began creeping through the trees and drainage ditches. They hoped to reach Murphy from the sides, hidden by smoke. One squad crawled dangerously close. Murphy noticed movement only at the last possible moment. A dozen German soldiers were already rising from a ditch, preparing to rush the burning tank destroyer. There was almost no time to react. Murphy swung the .50 caliber machine gun toward them. He squeezed the trigger. The heavy weapon thundered once more. The entire assault group disappeared beneath a storm of bullets. The immediate threat was over. But Murphy knew another attack would come. Jaish held He Pahan. The artillery operator asked a simple question. Lieutenant, how close are they? Murphy looked across the battlefield. German soldiers were now only yards away. He answered without panic, without fear. In a calm voice, he reportedly replied, "Just hold the phone. I'll let you talk to one of them." Even under impossible odds, his sense of humor remained intact. But the situation had never been more dangerous. Firing Owen, Hess, Owen, Posidion. Murphy made one final decision, perhaps the most dangerous decision of the entire battle. He requested artillery fire on his own location. American shells began falling almost directly around the burning tank destroyer. The explosions were deafening. Shrapnel tore through the trees. Steel fragments struck the wrecked vehicle again and again. One mistake, one shell landing only a few yards closer, would kill Murphy instantly. Yet he never changed his mind. If sacrificing himself meant saving Company B, he was willing to accept it. The Germans, Begin 2 Briek. Nearly an hour had passed. The German attack had completely stalled. Their officers struggled to organize another assault. Every attempt to move forward was crushed by Murphy's machine gun or American artillery. The soldiers who had expected an easy victory suddenly found themselves pinned down by one man. Confusion spread through the German ranks. Many believed they were facing a much larger American force hidden inside the woods. They had no idea that the man stopping them was standing completely alone. Moment, everything changed. Then, Murphy felt a sharp pain. His earlier leg wound had reopened. Blood soaked through his trousers. Every movement became more difficult. The machine gun was almost out of ammunition. The burning vehicle groaned beneath him. Flames continued spreading toward the ammunition storage. He knew he couldn't stay there forever. But he had already achieved something extraordinary. He had bought enough time. Behind him, Company B had reorganized. American artillery had shattered the momentum of the German assault. The moment had finally come. Murphy climbed down from the burning tank destroyer, still under enemy fire, and limped back toward his waiting soldiers. The battle was not over, but the impossible had already happened. One American lieutenant had held back nearly 250 German soldiers, almost entirely alone. For more than an hour, Audie Murphy had stood alone against an enemy force many times larger than his own. The frozen battlefield was now covered with smoke, burning vehicles, shattered trees, and the silence that follows an impossible fight. Murphy finally climbed down from the burning tank destroyer. The moment his boots touched the snow, his body nearly gave way. The wound in his leg had reopened. Blood soaked through his uniform. Only then did the pain truly begin to catch up with him. But Murphy ignored it. There was still work to do. The counterattack. Company B had survived. The artillery barrage had bought them precious time. The German assault had slowed. Now, Murphy saw an opportunity. Instead of waiting for another attack, he chose to strike first. Limping through the snow with his men behind him, Murphy reorganized the shattered company. Many of the soldiers were exhausted. Some had almost no ammunition left. Others had already accepted that they might not survive the day. Yet when they saw their wounded commander walking back toward them, still giving orders, still refusing medical treatment, their confidence returned. Murphy pointed toward the battlefield. "Let's move." The Americans advanced, slowly, carefully, step by step. The Germans, believing they had been facing a much larger American force, were now uncertain. Their attack had failed. Their momentum was gone. As Company B pushed forward, the German soldiers gradually withdrew back toward Holzweiler. Against every expectation, the American line held. The battle was over. Hours earlier, everything had pointed toward disaster. 40 exhausted American soldiers, facing tanks, artillery, and nearly 250 German infantry. Military logic suggested Company B should have been destroyed. Instead, they were still standing. Historians continue to study the battle because it demonstrated something remarkable. Leadership can sometimes outweigh numbers. One determined soldier can inspire an entire company. Murphy never claimed he had won the battle alone. He always credited his fellow soldiers, the artillery crews, and every man who stood beside him. But those who witnessed the fighting knew the truth. Without Murphy's decision to remain behind, Company B might never have survived. The world hears the story. News of the battle quickly spread through the American army. Officers interviewed eyewitnesses. Artillery observers submitted reports. Soldiers described what they had seen. Again and again, the same story emerged. A single lieutenant had climbed onto a burning tank destroyer, operated a heavy machine gun while completely exposed, directed artillery fire almost onto his own position, and stopped an entire German assault. Many senior officers found the reports difficult to believe. The details sounded almost impossible, but every witness told the same story. The evidence was undeniable. The Medial OF Honor. Several months later, Audie Murphy stood in military formation as the United States Army recognized his extraordinary courage. He was awarded the Medal of Honor, America's highest military decoration. It was not given simply because he fought bravely. Thousands of soldiers had fought bravely. Murphy received the nation's highest award because his actions had gone far beyond ordinary courage. He knowingly placed his own life at extreme risk to save others. His stand near Holzweiler instantly became one of the most celebrated acts of heroism in American military history. At just 19 years old, Audie Murphy had become a national hero. A hero WHO never felt like any. When reporters asked him about the battle, Murphy rarely spoke about himself. He preferred talking about the men who never returned home. To him, those were the real heroes. He believed surviving the war was not something to celebrate. It was something to be grateful for. That humility made Americans admire him even more. He wasn't chasing fame. He wasn't trying to become a legend. He had simply done what he believed was his duty. A different Batley Watts. The war in Europe was nearing its end. Germany would surrender only a few months later. Millions celebrated peace. Families welcomed, soldiers home. But for many veterans, the hardest battle had not ended on the battlefield. It had only just begun. For Audie Murphy, the memories of war would follow him for the rest of his life. And although the world would remember him as America's greatest war hero, very few people knew the price he continued to pay long after the shooting stopped. The war in Europe ended in May 1945. Across the continent, church bells rang. Crowds filled the streets. Soldiers embraced one another as years of destruction finally came to an end. For millions, it was a day of celebration. For Audie Murphy, it was something very different. While others celebrated victory, Murphy thought about the men who would never return home. The friends he had laughed with, the soldiers he had fought beside, the young lives lost across the battlefields of North Africa, Italy, France, and Germany. Victory had come, but it had demanded an unimaginable price. A Marika's W hero. When Audie Murphy returned to the United States, he wasn't just another veteran. He had become a national symbol. Newspapers across America called him the country's greatest war hero. Crowds gathered wherever he appeared. Parades were organized in his honor. Military leaders praised his courage. Yet behind every smile, Murphy remained the same quiet young man from Texas. He accepted the applause with humility. Whenever reporters asked him about medals, he often changed the subject. Instead, he spoke about the soldiers who never came home. He believed they deserved the recognition far more than he did. That quiet humility only made Americans admire him even more. Hull, lewd, calms, cowling. Murphy's incredible story soon attracted the attention of Hollywood. Film producers believed audiences would be inspired by the young war hero. Over the following years, he appeared in dozens of movies. Most were westerns, where his calm confidence and authentic military bearing made him a natural actor. Eventually, he did something few soldiers could ever imagine. He portrayed himself in a film based on his own autobiography. Millions watched the movie. To audiences, it looked like another Hollywood success story. But reality was far more complicated. T. Invisible Wands. Although the war had ended, its memories never left him. Like many veterans returning from World War II, Murphy struggled with what today is recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. At the time, very few people understood the condition. There was little treatment, little support, and almost no public awareness. Murphy often suffered from nightmares. Loud noises could instantly transport him back to the battlefield. Friends later recalled that he frequently slept with a loaded pistol nearby, not because he expected danger, but because part of him never truly left the war. The battles were over, yet inside his mind, they continued. F-ich esting FOR Other veterans. Rather than hiding his struggles forever, Murphy eventually chose to speak publicly. He encouraged Americans to recognize the emotional scars carried by returning soldiers. He believed that invisible wounds deserved the same respect as physical injuries. At a time when almost nobody discussed mental health, his honesty was remarkably courageous. Once again, he wasn't fighting for medals. He was fighting for others. The final journey. On May 28, 1971, Audie Murphy boarded a small private aircraft bound for Virginia. The weather was poor. Clouds covered the mountains. Visibility was dangerously limited. The aircraft never reached its destination. It crashed into the mountainside, killing everyone on board. Audie Murphy was only 45 years old. America had lost one of its greatest heroes, a simply request. Murphy was buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. Thousands came to pay their respects. Yet before his death, he had made one final request. Unlike many Medal of Honor recipients, he did not want his grave to stand apart from the others. He asked for a simple headstone, no elaborate design, no special decoration, only the name of an ordinary American soldier. Even in death, humility remained one of his defining qualities, a legacy that still lives. Today, visitors continue to stand before his grave in silence. Military cadets study his leadership. Historians analyze the battle at Holtzweiler. Young soldiers still read about the 19-year-old lieutenant who stood alone against overwhelming odds. Not because he believed he couldn't be defeated, but because he refused to abandon the men depending on him. His courage was extraordinary. But perhaps his greatest strength was something even rarer: responsibility. He never asked others to face dangers he wasn't willing to face himself. That is why, nearly 80 years later, Audie Murphy remains one of the most respected names in American military history. Ending. History often remembers great battles, powerful armies, and famous generals. But sometimes, the course of history is shaped by the courage of a single individual. On a frozen battlefield in France, one young lieutenant stood alone against impossible odds. He didn't fight for glory. He didn't fight for recognition. He fought because his fellow soldiers needed time, and because giving up was never an option. That day, one American held back hundreds, not through strength alone, but through courage. And that is why the name Audie Murphy will forever remain one of the greatest legends of World War II.